The morning sun cast long shadows across Westminster Abbey as Prince William stood before the ornate mirror in his private chambers. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the ceremonial robes that would soon mark him as King of England. The weight of the moment pressed down on his shoulders like the very crown he was about to wear. Sarah, his longtime dresser, noticed the prince's distant expression. She had dressed him for countless royal events, but today felt different. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that she had not seen since his mother's funeral decades ago. The golden threads of his coronation robes caught the light, creating an almost ethereal glow around him. "Your Highness," Sarah whispered softly, "perhaps we should adjust the cape slightly." But William barely heard her. His mind was elsewhere. Traveling back through memories of his mother, Princess Diana, who had always dreamed of seeing her sons happy and fulfilled in their roles. Outside, thousands of people had gathered along the streets of London. Families had traveled from across the Commonwealth, camping overnight to secure the best viewing spots. Margaret Thompson, a 78-year-old grandmother from Manchester, held her great-grandson's hand tightly. She had witnessed Queen Elizabeth's coronation as a young woman, and now she was here to see the next chapter of British history unfold. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Street vendors sold commemorative flags and mugs, while television crews from around the world prepared for what would become one of the most watched events in recent history. Children waved tiny Union Jacks, their faces painted with the colors of the flag, completely unaware of the historical significance of the day. Inside the Abbey, Archbishop of Canterbury checked his notes one final time. The ceremony had been planned for months, every detail scrutinized and perfected. Ancient traditions would be honored while modern touches reflected the changing times. The choir practiced their final notes, their voices echoing through the sacred space that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. William's brother Harry had arrived earlier, their relationship still strained, but both men understanding the importance of this day. Family tensions seemed to fade in the presence of such a momentous occasion. Catherine, now queen consort, moved gracefully through the preparations, ensuring their children understood the significance of what they were about to witness. The prince took one last look at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was no longer just William. He was about to become a symbol of an entire nation's hopes and dreams. The weight of history pressed upon him, but so did the love and support of millions of people who believed in the monarchy's future. As the bells of Westminster Abbey began to toll, announcing the beginning of the ceremony, William closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was a new determination in his gaze. This was his moment, his destiny, and he was ready to embrace it fully. The doors to his chamber opened, and the sound of the congregation filled the air. Hundreds of dignitaries, world leaders, and members of the royal family had gathered to witness this historic moment. The Archbishop's voice could be heard in the distance, beginning the ancient words that would transform a prince into a king. Sarah stepped back, her work complete. She had dressed many royals over the years, but watching William prepare for his coronation felt like witnessing the birth of a new era. The young man who had once been a grieving child at his mother's funeral was now ready to lead a nation into the future. As William stepped toward the door, he carried with him not just the hopes of his family, but the dreams of an entire Commonwealth. The coronation was about to begin, and the world was watching. The procession began with the haunting sound of trumpets echoing through Westminster Abbey. William walked slowly down the aisle, his footsteps measured and deliberate on the ancient stone floor. Every eye in the Abbey was upon him, but his gaze remained fixed ahead, toward the altar where his destiny awaited. Among the congregation, Emma Richards, a young teacher from Wales, felt tears well up in her eyes. She had won her seat through a community lottery, never imagining she would witness such a historic moment. Beside her sat Lord Pemberton, an 85-year-old peer who had attended 3 coronations in his lifetime. The contrast between their backgrounds seemed to disappear in the shared reverence of the moment. Catherine watched her husband with a mixture of pride and concern. She knew the burden he was about to accept would change their family forever. Their eldest son, Prince George, sat perfectly still, his young mind trying to comprehend that his father was about to become king. The weight of his own future seemed to settle upon his small shoulders. The choir's voices rose in harmony, filling the abbey with a sound that seemed to touch the very soul of every person present. Mrs. Abdul Rahman, a Muslim woman from Birmingham, who had been invited to represent her community, found herself moved to tears by the beauty of the moment. Despite the differences in their faiths, as William approached the altar, he caught sight of his father's portrait hanging nearby. King Charles had ruled for only a brief time before his passing, and William often wondered if he was truly ready for the responsibility that was now his. The memory of his father's guidance echoed in his mind, giving him strength for what lay ahead. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the sacred words that had been spoken for centuries. Each phrase carried the weight of history, connecting William to a line of monarchs stretching back through the ages. In the television control room, director James Mitchell watched the ratings climb to unprecedented levels. People worldwide were watching this moment unfold. Dr. Peterson, a historian from Oxford, sat in the academic section, furiously taking notes. He had studied coronations for decades, but witnessing one in person was entirely different. The emotional undercurrent was palpable. This was not just a ceremony, but a living connection to Britain's past and future. The moment arrived for the anointing. William knelt as the Archbishop approached with the holy oil, a tradition dating back over 1,000 years. Oil touched his forehead, and in that instant, something changed. The transformation was visible to everyone present. The prince was becoming a king. In the crowd outside, young Jamie Morrison from Scotland held his grandmother's hand tightly. She had promised to bring him to London for the coronation, and despite her recent illness, she had kept her word. The effort it had taken her to travel was evident, but the joy on her face made it all worthwhile. The crown jewels sparkled under the abbey's lights as they were presented one by one. The orb, the scepter, and finally, the St. Edward's crown. Each item carried centuries of history and tradition. The craftsmen who had polished these treasures for the ceremony watched from the wings, their work now part of this historic moment. Queen Camilla, now Queen Mother, watched with tears streaming down her face. She remembered William as a young boy, and seeing him take on this enormous responsibility filled her with both pride and worry. The royal family had endured so many challenges over the years, but this moment represented hope for a new beginning. As the crown was lifted high above William's head, the entire abbey fell silent. This was the moment that would define not just his life, but the future of the monarchy itself. The weight of the crown seemed to symbolize the weight of the nation's expectations, hopes and dreams. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly the crown descended toward William's head. In that moment, every person in the abbey, from the highest nobles to the ordinary citizens, understood they were witnessing history in the making. The boy who had walked behind, his mother's coffin, was about to become their king. The crown touched William's head, and in that precise moment, the entire abbey seemed to hold its breath. The weight of St. Edward's crown was not just physical, it carried the hopes, dreams, and expectations of an entire nation. As the archbishop's hands released the ancient symbol of monarchy, William felt a profound shift within himself. God save the king. The cry erupted from the congregation like thunder, rolling through the abbey and out into the streets where thousands of people took up the chant. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, and deeply moving. William's eyes glistened with unshed tears as the reality of his new role settled upon him. In the third row, Detective Inspector Sarah Williams, who had been part of William's security detail for years, felt her professional composure crack. She had seen him through his darkest moments after Diana's death, watched him grow from a grieving teenager into a man ready to lead. Her own tears flowed freely as she witnessed his transformation into king. The ceremony continued with the presentation of the regalia. Each item, the golden orb representing the world, the scepter symbolizing power, the ring signifying marriage to the nation, was placed in William's hands with solemn reverence. The weight of these objects seemed to anchor him to the earth even as his spirit soared with the magnitude of the moment. Young Princess Charlotte, sitting with perfect posture beside her brothers, watched her father with wide eyes. At her age, She could not fully grasp the significance of what was happening. But she understood that something extraordinary was taking place. Her hand found her mother's, seeking comfort in the familiar touch. The music swelled again, this time with Handel's Zadok, the priest. The same piece that had been played at every British coronation for nearly 3 centuries. The familiar notes seemed to bridge the gap between past and present, connecting William to every monarch who had come before him. In the press gallery, veteran royal correspondent Patricia Montague wiped away tears as she typed her live report. She had covered the royal family for 30 years, but nothing had prepared her for the raw emotion of this moment. Her fingers trembled as she tried to capture in words what millions were feeling in their hearts. The congregation included people from every walk of life, from prime ministers to postal workers, from religious leaders to school children. Mrs. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who had become a British citizen just 2 years earlier, felt a deep connection to her adopted country. As she watched the ceremony unfold, the monarchy represented continuity and stability in a rapidly changing world. As the final prayers were spoken, William rose to his feet, now fully transformed. The man who stood before them was no longer simply a prince. He was their king. Invested with all the authority and responsibility that the title carried, the change was visible in his posture, his expression, and the way he moved. The recessional began, and William walked back down the aisle, now crowned and carrying the regalia. His steps were more confident, his bearing more regal. The transformation was complete, and everyone who witnessed it felt they had been part of something truly historic outside the abbey. The crowds erupted in celebration, flags waved, horns honked, and people embraced strangers as if they were old friends. The communal joy was infectious, spreading through the streets of London like wildfire. Street performers juggled, children danced, and elderly couples kissed as if they were young again. Television cameras captured every moment, broadcasting the celebration to every corner of the globe. In remote villages and bustling cities, people gathered around screens to witness this moment of history. The monarchy, an institution that had seemed outdated to some, suddenly felt vibrantly alive and relevant. As William emerged from the abbey, the sunlight caught the jewels in his crown, creating a dazzling display that seemed almost divine. Cheers of the crowd washed over him like a wave, and for the first time since the ceremony began, he allowed himself to smile. The weight of the crown was still there, but so was the love and support of his people. The procession to Buckingham Palace began. With William and Catherine riding in the gold state coach, the horses stepped high, their hooves echoing on the pavement in rhythm with the beating hearts of the thousands lining the route. This was more than a parade. It was a celebration of continuity, tradition, and hope for the future. The gold state coach rolled through the streets of London, its wheels turning on cobblestones that had witnessed countless royal processions throughout history. Inside, King William sat beside Queen Catherine, both of them overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. The cheers of the crowd penetrated the ornate carriage, a constant reminder of the people they now served. 8 gray horses pulled the coach, their hooves creating a rhythmic symphony that seemed to match the heartbeat of the nation. The coachman, Thomas Bradley, had driven this route in practice dozens of times, but today felt entirely different. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him just as it did upon the newly crowned king behind him. Along the Mall, families had claimed their spots since dawn. The Patel family from Leicester had driven through the night to be there, their 3 children wrapped in blankets and clutching miniature flags. When the golden coach appeared in the distance, their youngest daughter, Priya, pointed excitedly and shouted, "Look, Mama, the king." Her innocent joy captured the essence of the day. Police Constable Michael O'Brien had worked countless royal events, but nothing had prepared him for the emotional intensity of this moment. As the coach passed his position, he found himself standing straighter, his chest swelling with pride. The crowd's energy was infectious. Even the most stoic officers found themselves smiling. Inside the coach, William's mind wandered to his mother. He could almost hear Diana's voice encouraging him, telling him to trust in himself and remember that the crown was not just a symbol of power, but of service. The thought brought fresh tears to his eyes. But these were tears of gratitude rather than sorrow. The procession moved past Trafalgar Square, where the fountains seemed to dance in celebration. Street artist Maria Santos had positioned herself with her easel, frantically trying to capture the scene. Her painting would never be displayed in a gallery, but it would hang in her small apartment as a reminder of the day she witnessed history. Children held up homemade signs reading "Welcome King William" and "God Save the King." They're colorful artwork adding a personal touch to the grand spectacle. 8-year-old Tommy Wilson from Manchester had spent weeks making his sign, carefully coloring each letter. When the King's coach passed, Tommy waved so enthusiastically that his sign almost flew from his hands. The sound of church bells filled the air from every corner of London. Each bell tower added its voice to the celebration, creating a musical tapestry that seemed to embrace the entire city. The bells of St. Paul's Cathedral rang out with particular resonance, their deep tones carrying across the Thames. As the procession turned onto the final stretch toward Buckingham Palace, the crowd's excitement reached fever pitch. People climbed lampposts, stood on benches, and lifted children onto their shoulders for a better view. The sea of faces stretched as far as the eye could see. All united in this moment of shared experience, Queen Catherine reached over and took William's hand. Her touch was gentle but firm, a reminder that he was not alone in this journey. She had watched him struggle with the weight of his destiny, and now she was there to support him as he embraced it fully. Their children would grow up knowing their father as king, and she would help them understand both the privilege and the responsibility that came with their positions. The coach's interior was adorned with silk and gold, but the true magnificence came from the moment itself. William looked out at the faces in the crowd, young and old, rich and poor, from every background imaginable. They were all his people now, and he felt the full weight of that responsibility. A group of veterans from the Royal Navy stood at attention as the coach passed, their uniforms pristine and their faces proud. These men had served the crown for decades, and seeing their new king brought tears to their weathered eyes. Commander James Harrison, who had served in the Falklands, saluted as the coach passed, his gesture one of respect and loyalty. The final approach to Buckingham Palace was lined with members of the Royal Guard, their red uniforms and bearskin hats, creating a corridor of tradition and ceremony. The horses seemed to sense the importance of the moment, their steps becoming more measured and dignified as they approached the palace gates. As the golden coach finally came to a stop in front of Buckingham Palace, the crowd's roar was deafening. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the first appearance of the newly crowned king on the palace balcony. The day was far from over, but already it had become one of the most memorable in British history. The doors of Buckingham Palace opened with ceremonial grandeur as King William and Queen Catherine stepped inside. The palace staff, many of whom had served the royal family for decades, stood in perfect formation along the entrance hall. Their faces showed a mixture of pride, emotion, and deep respect for the moment they were witnessing. Mrs. Eleanor Hastings, the head housekeeper who had worked at the palace for 40 years, felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she curtsied to the new king. She had watched William grow from a young boy visiting his grandmother into the man who now wore the crown. The transformation was overwhelming to witness. The red drawing room had been prepared for a brief reception with close family and friends. The room's crimson walls seemed to glow in the afternoon light, creating an atmosphere of warmth and intimacy that contrasted sharply with the grandeur of the morning ceremony. Here, away from the public eye, William could finally begin to process what had just happened. Prince George, still dressed in his ceremonial outfit, approached his father with a mixture of awe and confusion. The young prince had watched his father transform into a king, but he was still the same man who read him bedtime stories and helped with his homework. William knelt down to his son's level, the crown still heavy on his head, and embraced him gently. "Are you really the king now, Papa?" George asked, his voice barely above a whisper. William nodded, his eyes filling with tears he had been holding back all day. "Yes, my son. And someday this will be your responsibility too." The weight of those words settled over both father and son, creating a moment of profound connection. Outside, the crowds had not dispersed. If anything, they had grown larger, with people continuing to stream toward the palace from every direction. The mall was packed with humanity, a sea of faces all turned toward the balcony, waiting for the moment that would cap off this historic day. Inside the palace, the Archbishop of Canterbury had arrived for a private blessing. The formal ceremony was complete, but this quiet moment of prayer and reflection was equally important. William knelt before the Archbishop, the crown temporarily removed, and received a personal blessing that would guide him through the challenges ahead. The palace photographer, David Chen, captured these intimate moments with respectful discretion. These photographs would become part of history, documenting not just the public spectacle, but the personal journey of a man accepting his destiny. Each image told a story of transformation, duty, and love. Queen Catherine had changed from her ceremonial gown into a more comfortable outfit, but she still looked every inch the queen. She moved through the reception with grace and dignity. Speaking to each guest personally, her presence seemed to calm everyone around her, including her husband, who drew strength from her steady support. The moment everyone had been waiting for was approaching. The palace balcony overlooked the vast crowd that had gathered to celebrate their new king. William stood at the French doors, looking out at the sea of faces, flags, and banners that filled his view. The noise from the crowd was constant, low roar of excitement and anticipation. "It's time, Your Majesty," whispered his private secretary James Morrison. The formal address still felt strange to William, but he was beginning to understand that it represented more than just a title. It was a constant reminder of his duty to serve. The royal family gathered at the balcony doors. The children were excited but nervous, understanding that this moment would be remembered forever. Catherine took William's hand one more time, squeezing it gently before they stepped into the public eye. The crowd's roar became deafening as the balcony doors opened. William stepped forward first, still wearing the crown, followed by Catherine and their children. The sight of the newly crowned king triggered an explosion of cheers, applause, and celebration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. Flags waved frantically, horns blared, and people embraced strangers as if they were family. The joy was infectious, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. This was more than a celebration of a new king. It was a celebration of continuity, tradition, and hope for the future. William raised his hand in acknowledgement, and the crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, but nothing could have prepared him for the emotional intensity of seeing his people's love and support displayed so powerfully. The family stood together on the balcony, waving to the crowd, their faces reflecting the joy and excitement of the moment. This was the image that would be remembered, the new king surrounded by his family, embraced by his people, ready to lead the nation into the future. As the sun began to set over London, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the celebrations continued throughout the city. The coronation of King William had become more than a ceremony. It had become a moment of national unity that would be remembered for generations to come. The balcony appearance had lasted for nearly 20 minutes, with the royal family waving to the crowd and acknowledging the overwhelming display of support. When they finally stepped back inside the palace, William felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The weight of the crown on his head was nothing compared to the weight of responsibility he now carried in his heart. That evening, private dinner was held in the palace's state dining room. The guest list was small but meaningful family members, close friends, and the key figures who had helped make the day possible. The conversation was warm and intimate, a stark contrast to the formal ceremony of the morning. During the dinner, William stood to address his guests. His voice was steady but emotional as he spoke about the honor he felt in serving his people, and the gratitude he had for everyone who had supported him on this journey. "Today I became your king," he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I have always been and will always be your servant." The words resonated deeply with everyone present. This was not just a new king speaking, but a man who truly understood the sacred trust that had been placed in him. The applause that followed was heartfelt and genuine, a recognition of the sincerity of his commitment. Outside the palace, the crowds had begun to disperse, but the celebrations continued in pubs, restaurants, and homes across the country. Television coverage of the coronation had reached record-breaking numbers, with an estimated 3 billion people worldwide having watched at least part of the ceremony in Manchester. The Thompson family gathered around their television for the evening news coverage. Grandmother Margaret, who had attended the coronation in person, shared her experiences with 3 generations of her family. The stories she told would become part of their family history, passed down through the years. As a reminder of the day they witnessed history, social media platforms were flooded with images and videos from the day. People shared their personal experiences, their emotions, their hopes for the future under their new king. The hashtag #LongLiveTheKing trended globally, with millions of people adding their voices to the celebration. The international response, it was overwhelmingly positive. World leaders sent congratulations, and foreign press coverage praised both the ceremony and the new king's evident dedication to his role. The coronation had reminded the world of the continuing relevance and importance of the British monarchy. As the night grew deeper, William finally removed the crown and placed it carefully on its stand. The weight lifted from his head, but the responsibility remained in his heart. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. Seeing a man forever changed by the events of the day, Catherine joined him in their private quarters, and they sat together, in comfortable silence, processing the magnitude of what had occurred. Their children were asleep, exhausted by the excitement of the day, but they would wake up tomorrow as the children of a king. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Catherine asked softly. William considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know if anyone can ever be truly ready for this," he replied. "But I'm willing to learn, to grow, and to serve with everything I have." The coronation had ended, but the reign of King William was just beginning. The challenges ahead would be many, but the love and support he had witnessed from his people that day would sustain him through whatever difficulties lay ahead in the weeks that followed. The emotional impact of the coronation continued to resonate throughout the nation. People spoke of feeling more connected to their country, more proud of their heritage, and more hopeful about the future. The ceremony had achieved something remarkable. It had united a diverse nation in a shared moment of celebration and commitment. Years later, when historians looked back on this day, they would recognize it as a turning point, the moment when the monarchy proved its continuing relevance in the modern world. But for those who witnessed it, both in person and through their screens, it would always be remembered as the day when a prince became a king, and a nation found its soul. The tears that had been shed that day, tears of joy, pride, and hope, had watered the seeds of a new era. King William's reign had begun not with conquest or ceremony alone, but with love, and that love would define everything that followed.